Good evening. Welcome to the Glazov Gang. Tonight, a very special episode with a very special guest, Dinesh D'Souza, the acclaimed conservative political commentator, author, lecturer, and filmmaker. And he is the author of the new book, America, Imagine a World Without Her. And as many of you know, it is also out as a major motion pictures, and it is playing in theaters everywhere. Make sure you see this special film and read this special book. Dinesh D'Souza, what an honor and a privilege to have you on the Glazov Gang.
Jamie, it's always good to be on with you.
Thank you so much. Dinesh, before we begin, I would just like to say many years have passed. I think it was 10 years ago, maybe even 15, but I read a book called The End of Racism. And Dinesh, it had a profound influence on me. It left an indelible mark in my brain, and it profoundly shaped my political and intellectual journey. And I would just like to thank you very much for writing that book.
I think that was, Jamie, 1995, so we're all getting on in years a little bit, my friend.
Yeah, the years are passing, but thank you for writing The End of Racism. Very, very powerful, profound book. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. In some sense, what that book was predicting or saying that racism, which was systematic in American life, had now become episodic, that it no longer commanded the kind of power it once did. In some sense, that book looked forward to, I hate to say this, but looked forward to the election of somebody like Obama, in which a majority white country elects really almost unhesitatingly an African-American president. Many people thought that would take 100 years, but it certainly didn't.
Absolutely. And Dinesh, let us now turn to your contemporary masterpiece, both a book and a film, America, Imagine a World Without Her. We're going to go back and forth a little bit from the book to the film. Of course, the themes are all overlapping. Let us begin with your first chapter of your book, Dinesh, Suicide of a Nation. You know, I was very taken by this. You write how Albert Camus believed that suicide was an ethical choice. He regarded suicide, you write, as a moral course of action. And you tie this in, Dinesh, to what is happening in America and the leaders who have taken over. Tell us a little bit about this and why you chose Camus for this example.
Well, you know, people from the beginning of time have fallen into despair and committed suicide. So there's nothing new about suicide. I think what's remarkable about Camus is that he was saying that as a result of our discovery, the existentialist discovery that there is no God and that our lives are meaningless, he said we as human beings have to face that. And when we face that, we realize that life has no purpose. And some of us may decide that if that's the case, then we should exit the scene. We should commit suicide, not as a measure of pure despair, but as a thoughtful recognition of our position in the world. Suicide becomes an ethical option for human beings. And I thought that's a very interesting idea, and in some senses it seems to me a little bit of what the progressives are saying about America. They're saying America is a powerful country, but it doesn't deserve to be. Why should a country with 5% of the world's population enjoy such a disproportionate standard of the world's wealth? Why should it dominate the world in this way so that important things can't happen in South America or the Middle East or Asia without America having a big fat say-so? So for these progressives, it is an ethical option to shrink and diminish and perhaps even cancel out America's predominant role in the world, this American era that we've been living in since 1945.
And these quote-unquote progressives, the left, what you're getting to is that they actually want an American decline, and they want the rest of the world, even enemies, to go up.
They think that that's the minimum requirement of global justice. So remember, I'm not saying that they are just pure haters of America, that they mindlessly want to destroy America, or that they're pawns of some puppeteer. No, I'm saying that they believe that it's wrong, morally wrong, for America to enjoy this disproportionate standard of living and this disproportionate level of power. Of course, this goes hand in hand with an elaborate argument that America's wealth has been expropriated, has been stolen, has been looted and plundered, first from the Native Americans, then from African Americans, and so on. So I call this a story of American shame, and the left has developed this critique, and it's now a very powerful force in our culture.
And I want to get to how you so professionally and powerfully refuted that shaming and those accusations. Before we do, though, let me just ask, Dinesh, if I'm not mistaken, you've made a few prophecies. You're also in some ways of prophet because some of these prophecies have come true. For instance, what's happened to the $17 trillion? We have now a $17 trillion debt. I think you yourself back in the day was saying that the left would be increasing our debt to this extent.
Yeah, we made some quite specific predictions in the film 2016. And, I advanced a controversial theory about Obama that he had, in a sense, imbibed the anti-colonial fanaticism of his father. And a lot of people said, well, that's crazy. You know, Obama's an African-American. His roots are in Selma and so on. Not true. But nevertheless, the thesis of 2016 was controversial. And so I said, look, like any scientific theory, one way you test it out is you make some predictions. You don't know how the world is going to come out, so you predict. And if your theory is right, you should be approximating the truth. And so I said, Obama will shrink the size of America in the world, but he will expand the size of the American government. That the national debt is $8.5 trillion when Obama came in. It's going to be about double, about 17 trillion or more.
And you are exactly right.
And so these things have come to pass. I can't say I'm happy about it, but it is a bit of a vindication of the earlier theory.
Yes. Dinesh, what does it mean? You write about this in your chapter, Suicide of a Nation. It's a $17 trillion debt. And now, as you point out, is actually larger than our annual gross domestic product. What does that mean for our country?
Well, for our country, it means that we have a millstone strapped around our neck. I think for what Obama, though, it actually means global redistribution, because our debt is not owned by us. It'd be one thing if the American government owed money to the American people. But the American government owes money to a lot of foreigners, including a lot of foreign governments. About a third of our debt is held by Chinese and Saudis. So people in other countries, and so by having this enormous debt, it becomes a transfer of power and of money and wealth away from the United States and toward the rest of the world. The point being, Obama isn't just a domestic redistributionist, he's a global redistributionist.
Wow. Dinesh, you also write about the growing power of Russia and China. A little bit. Tell us about their growing power and its significance.
You know, in this new film, our subtitle is Imagine a World Without, meaning a world without America. And I intended that to be kind of a hypothetical. It's almost like think about what the world might look like if American influence is subtracted and reduced. But as I look around the world now and see the aggression of Putin in the Ukraine, as I see the Iraq go up in flames, Iran consolidating its power while pursuing a nuclear bomb, when I see what's happened in Egypt with the collapse of our ally Mubarak and the chaos that happened over there, when I see how irrelevant America has become in South America, I mean, basically we're beginning to see in reality what a world looks like with America having become more and more irrelevant.
Absolutely, Dinesh. And something very interesting that you pointed out overall that's connected to all this, hope and change, even in terms of this theme of change. But is change always necessarily good? And, you know, you write in that chapter that it has been said that if termites could talk, they would call what they do progress.
Well, that's a way of saying that progress is always from a particular measurement, from a particular criterion, from somebody's point of view. Now, when Obama talks about the remaking of America, how do you remake something? I mean, how do you remake a bridge? Well, you remake a bridge by taking down the bridge that was there before. So Obama always meant to say that in order to create this new vision of America, he wanted to dismantle the America that's here now. But people didn't hear that. Now, why didn't they hear that? And that's because of the pathology of race in this country. Americans have been so guilt-ridden about this issue and actually so disgusted at the Al Sharptons and Jesse Jacksons of the world that there was a deep national hunger for a guy like Obama who seemed to be a different sort of African-American. And so here he comes galloping on the scene. Everybody goes, phew, he's going to be so different. They mindlessly absorbed his hope and change propaganda, not realizing that he had a very different ideology from most Americans, Republican or Democrat.
Absolutely. Dinesh, let us get to the accusation of theft. And what I love so much that you do in your book and in your movie, you let You know, you let the critics, you let the accusers, you let those who make these indictments, you let them give their case. And then you destroy their case one by one in terms of examples. First, tell us a little bit about progressives' theft accusation against America.
The progressive argument at its core is that the wealth of America, the whole country's wealth, your wealth, mine, is based on theft. And they've developed an elaborate history that supports this idea, and also a contemporary argument. So the historical argument is not only that we stole the country from Native Americans, they correctly point out that slavery is a form of theft. Abraham Lincoln once said slavery is represented by the idea that you work and I eat, so it's a theft of labor. The progressives say that America stole half of Mexico in the Mexican War. And then they argue that our foreign policy now, and also our economic system, the free market, is theft, and it deprives people of what Obama calls the fair share. So this is the theft critique. And you're right, I'm very proud of the fact that in the movie, we were able to find leading liberals, but also leading radicals. And we let them, you know, they let America have it, if you will, in the movie. And I let them go. One of them even talks about the idea of dropping a nuclear bomb on America. He's so enraged. And you can see the little tumblers of his brain. If America's like Nazi Germany, then surely we'd want to blow up Nazi Germany, wouldn't we? So yeah, if I had an atomic bomb, he says, yeah, I would seriously consider dropping it on the United States. So this is a valuable insight into the progressive and the radical mind, that these are guys in some sense who are just as incensed against America as any Iranian mullah or Hamas radical in the Middle East.
Absolutely. Dinesh, just want to give a compliment to you, because when you're talking to Ward Churchill in that example and to all these other leftists, you carry yourself very graciously, very humbly, very nobly, and you know, you kind of lead them into making all these tremendously absurd and hateful statements. I just thought you did it brilliantly, Dinesh, with really, really beautiful style.
Thank you. Well, I actually sort of learned, Jamie, you know, from Michael Moore. In other words, I learned what not to do. Because, of course, he does the ambush thing. He will never have an intelligent conservative on his show. His idea is to make his opposition look completely buffoonish, to surprise Charlton Heston at his house at night. So Moore is essentially following an ambush strategy. I thought, let me do the opposite. I'm going to let these guys speak. I'm going to have my say, but not now. We're going to let them rail and rant. And in fact, to the point, in one of our screenings, a conservative woman almost got up and walked out of the theater because she was so disgusted at listening to this anti-American fusillade coming at her. But we convinced her to stay and said, look, we're going to be dealing with it. But I was so fair to the other side's point of view that she actually was beginning to feel a little sick to her stomach, as she put it.
No, but very, very, yeah. But Dinesh, since we're on that, you know, because I'm just so impressed with that dignified way in which you carry yourself with these haters of America. But there's something else a little bit in the genre and in the way that you do these things. You're always a little bit on a mysterious, a little bit adventure, and you're looking for the answer. You're not exactly sure, and you're just asking questions and embarking a little bit on a journey. And I'm very moved by that. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided in some ways to make your film in this way?
Well, I think here, this is part of the difference between a book and a film. The premise of a book is that you have done the research, you've thought it through, and you've already arrived at your conclusion. And very often in my books, I'll state the conclusion boldly at the front. It's almost like making a preposterous or outrageous claim, and then you spend the rest of the book defending it. So you mobilize your arguments around that thesis, but you have essentially already shown your hand in the introduction. You're saying, this is what I'm going to argue in the book. Now, a film doesn't work like that. A film is a journey. You want to start with the audience, and the audience doesn't know anything. So you're beginning to say, all right, now we're going to go find out. You put out a mystery, a puzzle, and then the movie is a kind of detective story. So in a certain way, documentary films, even though they are nonfiction, follow some of the same approaches as a good detective story, a good fiction movie, in that they have to have suspense, they have drama, they have discovery. You want the audience to have moments of recognition where they figure things out that you haven't spelled out for them. They're implicit in the film, but you let the audience go, aha, now I see the connection here. And that's part of the beauty of sitting in the theater and actually becoming a really smart guy in the process.
Absolutely. Dinesh, I just want to say, as a fan of Mike Tyson, I feel when I'm watching that film, and of course reading and watching your other work, you don't completely know it while you're watching it, but at the end you realize that it was a Mike Tyson knockout by you, but it came through a different form.
Well, thank you, Jamie. I appreciate that. Look, I feel that part of what has strengthened my work, humbly, is that being an immigrant, I've grown up in a different culture. So I see things about America, and right away I know that they're unique, that this is not the way the rest of the world is. I mean, for example, life is difficult everywhere, here as elsewhere. But in most parts of the world, people become cynical as a result. They begin to stop believing in goodness really as a national principle. They might try to foster private virtue, but the concept of public virtue is just too preposterous to take seriously. But not here. I mean, to me, it's very moving. I'll go to a rally of, of bikers. These are guys who are lower middle class. They have tattoos all over their body. I wouldn't normally hang out with these guys, but I go, you know what? Look at these guys. They hang on to patriotism. They hang on to God, their belief in country. They're trying to be better people than they are. This is a very American thing, and I identify with it. I sympathize with it, and I want to support it.
Thank you so much, Dinesh. And while we're on that, I want to move on to so many of these questions. I wish we had 5 hours. But I will say we share something, Dinesh, because I came here when I was 5.5 years old. My parents were dissidents in the Soviet Union. We escaped a monstrosity. We escaped hell. And I love this country. And I came here when I was 5.5 years old. And it's just a miracle to me. And I treasure America, and I cherish America, and I want to protect it from people that hate it and accuse it of many things. And you do that. And when I watch your film, I'm always also saying thank you to you.
Well, I don't blame the ordinary American for not being, A, very political, or B, even thinking about America that much. See, normally when we live in a house, we don't try to think about what are the blueprints that built the house. You just walk in the corridors, you lie on the couch. It's only when the house begins to shake, then you say, oh, I better go to the attic. I better find those blueprints because I need to know how this thing was put together. We're at that unusual moment in America when the American era that we've all taken for granted for 65 years is now precarious. The American dream can no longer be taken for granted. The idea that America's #1 in the world, that can't be taken for granted. Power seems to be moving toward countries like Russia, China, India, Brazil. So it's, some of this is going to happen anyway, but the idea that we elect a leadership and a president to protect and defend American interests, and this is the guy, the Pied Piper, who's leading us down this path, this is what I find particularly shocking and outrageous.
Absolutely, Dinesh. And look, in your book, you completely discredit this whole accusation of theft by showing, many things, including one of the great points you made. In order for there to be a charge of theft, somebody had to have owned something. Let's just talk about that very briefly for a minute, because you point out that the Indians, for instance, didn't even have a notion of property rights. So, and there was also a lot of theft going on before. How can something be stolen if it wasn't owned?
Well, in the film, we give the example of Manhattan. Now, Manhattan was reportedly sold by the Native Americans to the Dutch for a small amount of money. I say $700 in today's money. And people today on the left will go, well, look at this. The Dutch just took advantage of the Native Americans. Manhattan is worth an infinite amount of money, yet they paid a pittance for it. But wait a minute. When the Dutch bought Manhattan, there was no Manhattan. It was a godforsaken piece of land, like any godforsaken piece of land anywhere in the world. You can buy that land now in swamps and in remote areas of the world for $700. And that land is essentially worthless. So what has created value in Manhattan is not the land, it's what people built on that land in the subsequent 300 or 400 years. So no, the Native Americans were not cheated. We're not going to give them Manhattan back, and we shouldn't, because they didn't build Manhattan. Manhattan wasn't even Manhattan when they sold it.
Very powerful. And Dinesh, you show that America creates wealth. It's the first society really to be built on invention and trade, and it's not necessarily, and it is not built on theft and exploitation, etc. But Obama wants to camouflage what he's really doing. But what he's really saying is, this has been stolen from you, and I'm going to use my power to give it back to you.
Right. Obama is a master. He doesn't have the normal entrepreneurial talents. I mean, if someone were to tell him to come up and invent something or develop a software program or make an iPhone, he would give you a befuddled look. He can't do that. He can't even put up a website. But that's not to say he lacks skills. He is a resentment organizer. Not so much a community organizer, but an organizer of envy, resentment, and hatred. These are his specialties. And the reason he's so good at it is he's suffused with resentment and hatred himself. So where does the hatred come from? It comes from the hatred of an unproductive class of people who envies the success of the entrepreneurial class and wants to see a transfer of power away from the entrepreneurs and toward who? The journalists, the intellectuals, the academics, the union bosses, the community organizers, and the politicians, none of whom by themselves produce anything, but what they do produce in large quantities is resentment.
Wow. And let us get to what is for me the most fascinating part of your work, Dinesh, is Satan as community organizer. Let us begin with Saul Alinsky. Before I ask several questions, give our viewers a little bit who might not know who he was and why it's so significant that Obama and Hillary are his disciples.
Saul Alinsky was a community activist himself, a radical, and this is not my description of him. He wrote 2 books, both of which have the term radical in the title. The more famous of them is called Rules for Radicals, a kind of manual. There's a picture on the internet of Obama teaching the techniques of Rules for Radicals on a blackboard to a group of fellow community organizers. You know, Obama mysteriously kept going back to Chicago. Think about it. He came from Hawaii. He lived in Indonesia. He had ties to Kenya. He had no ties to Chicago, but he just kept going there again and again and again. Why? Because Chicago was the hothouse of Saul Alinsky. Obama admired Alinsky. Now, Hillary had an even closer tie with Alinsky. Obama never met Alinsky himself, but Hillary met Alinsky in high school, continued a relationship in college, invited Alinsky to speak at Wellesley, where she was a student, and wrote her senior thesis on Alinsky and Alinsky's organizing techniques. It was a very formative part of Hillary's political development. So in the film, we have rare footage of Alinsky, really never seen, I believe, in America before, and it actually shows you what kind of a guy Alinsky is. One of the things he says very interestingly in his own words is that he learns a lot of his techniques from the mafia. Alinsky would hang out with the Capone gang. He admired the way the mafia could extract money from people. I mean, we should think of the mafia as shakedown artists. These are people who knew how to shake money out of people. And Alinsky goes, how do I do that, but without using a gun? How do I politically become a shakedown artist like Al Capone? And he figured out how to do it. And the shaming of America can be thought of as Alinsky's gun. It's his way of putting people up against the wall as he reaches behind them to lift their wallets.
Wow. Now, Dinesh, let's zero in here. Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals, his book, he dedicated it to?
Well, this is strange because he doesn't call it a dedication, but he says, I got to doff my hat. I got to pay a tribute to the first radical. Who won his own kingdom. And then he says, Lucifer. Now, he's not kidding. This is the devil, Lucifer. And liberals, when they see this, they roll their eyes as if this was some kind of inside joke. But in a Playboy interview that Alinsky did about the same time, he went on and on about this to much greater length. He talked about the fact, he said, you know, I'm an atheist, but, you know, if there's a heaven and a hell, he goes, you sign me up for hell. Because he goes, you know, I want to get down there. Those are my people. So he was clearly thinking this through a little bit. Now, I'm not saying Alinsky is, you know, a devil worshiper. No. How can an atheist admire Satan? Well, I think we're talking here about the Satan that we find in Milton's Paradise Lost. Satan who's diabolically cunning, who's a liar, who's a schemer, who takes advantage of the innocence of Adam and Eve. Now, I want you to fast forward to what's happening, Jamie, right now on our border. What's happening right now on our border is Obama is using the Alinskyite strategy of deceit and cunning in order to take advantage of the goodness of the American people. He knows that if you produce kids with outstretched arms, hungry, in need of inoculations, it's going to be really difficult for good-hearted Americans to say no. And so he's cynically exploiting the goodwill of the American people to make political points. This border crisis is not something that's coming out of Central America or South America. It's manufactured right in the Obama administration.
Wow. Now let me center in on a few of the themes there, because deception and camouflage, and you talk about this in your analysis of Alinsky and everything, that the dedication to Satan, or excuse me, the tribute, or whatever we want to call it. You turn to Stanley Fish, one of the world's leading Milton scholars, and discussed how Lucifer is portrayed in Paradise Lost, etc. But Dinesh, as you show, Satan tries to make Eve think that he is on her side, even though he intends her destruction. You can feign interest in middle-class tastes, pretend to be like the people you hate and want to destroy. So tell us a little bit about this, like with Obama and Hillary. In some ways, there's a game happening there. They're pretending they're friends of certain people and looking out for their interests, but like Satan with Eve, they actually want to destroy you. And so what I want to add is even a little bit of what they are doing with that border crisis and with the illegal immigrants being shipped on Greyhounds to these middle-class communities. In some ways, you can see that this is a hit to the middle class.
Alinsky is very candid about this in his book. He says, what do we radicals think about the middle class? He goes, we hate them. We hate them. We hate their values. We want to destroy middle-class values. He goes, but let's note a couple of things. First, he says to the hippies of the 60s, he goes, most of you are middle class. You're not poor. You're not coming out of the ghetto. Many of you come from middle class, even upper middle class families. So he goes, you have an advantage. You have anthropological knowledge of the middle class, and you can use that knowledge to undermine the middle class. Second, he says, don't come across as a freak. Don't come across with a kind of hippie look. Don't call the police pigs, and don't throw blood at soldiers. Wave the flag. Pretend like you actually are one of these guys. Identify with the middle class, because that's the first step to seducing them over to your side. Then you can radicalize them. Then you can undermine the middle class beliefs in morality, decency, family, patriotism. But you've got to start by sneakily pretending to be one of them. So this is a lesson that Obama learned very well. If you look at the early Obama, he looks very much like one of those hippies or bohemians. But later he realized that it's much better to put on the clean-cut suit, cut his hair short. He even practiced, he says, voice modulation lessons to come across and sound like a Midwestern Tom Brokaw and not as some kind of a thug.
And therefore, 4 tactics in this whole thing that you crystallize, that, with Satan and what he did with Eve, what Alinsky's doing, etc. Polarization, demonization, organization, deception. Just talk a little bit about that. Or summarize.
We've talked a little bit about deception in the middle class. One of the strategies I want to highlight here, which Satan uses and Alinsky learned from that, is how to use intimidation. Intimidation is the idea that you put people against the wall, you grab them by the lapels, and you make them feel relieved when they pay you off. Now, Alinsky's intimidation was kind of petty intimidation. I mean, he would go, for example, into a mall, and if he wanted to make the organizers of the mall sit down with him and accede to his demands, he would have his people use all the restrooms in the mall and not allow anybody else in. They'd be using every stall, and so essentially the restrooms would be unusable, the management would throw up its hands, and Alinsky would say, either you agree to these things or my guys are going to do this every day. So this was the kind of petty outsider intimidation that Alinsky perfected. I think what Obama and Hillary realized, Hillary before Obama, is that this kind of intimidation is a little weak because it's an outsider trying to threaten a corporation or trying to threaten local government. Hillary's insight was, wait a minute, what if the radicals, instead of intimidating people and pressuring the government from the outside, what if the radicals can become the government? Then they can use the government to intimidate people. They can use all the instruments of law, the IRS, the FEC, the SEC, and the NSA. And this way you can gather files and documents and information on people. It doesn't mean you're always going to use it, but people will know you can. And it's that knowledge, and boy, Jamie, I see you shaking your head, because this is in fact what totalitarian societies have always wanted to do. If only the Soviet Union had this kind of technology, they wouldn't have to have children call in on their parents, because they'd have better technology to be able to record what the parents were saying anyway. So I think we're in a rather scary moment in America in which we've got to decide as Americans, do we cherish our civil liberties? Do we want to have our government have the power to do this to us? Collectivism is taking on a completely new dimension in the 21st century.
Yes, Dinesh, in the last few minutes that we have, I wish we had a few hours. I cannot leave this program without mentioning your theme of the spirit of 1776. And you are stressing that while it's under attack here, the whole rest of the world is trying to embrace it. Talk a little bit about that, and in general, why you see the spirit of 1776 is so crucial to our thinking and to our battle.
The world from time immemorial has been driven by, in the film we call it the conquest ethic. It's the idea that you become rich or you get land. The borders of most countries have been established, obviously, by conquest. Machiavelli says it's the way of the world. But America came up with a different way. Equal rights, self-determination, and wealth creation. The idea that when Steve Jobs makes an iPhone, he's converted sand into silicon. He hasn't stolen from anybody. There's no conquest involved. We are voluntarily parting with our money to get something that we didn't even know that we wanted or couldn't live without. This is the American way. And it's a great gift to the world. So today, hundreds of millions of people in so many different countries, but predominantly China and India, are lifting themselves up out of poverty because of America's recipe of technological capitalism. And to me, it breaks my heart to see Obama here in America undermining that very formula and, in a sense, declaring war against the wealth creators, all in the name of the worst angels of our nature: envy, resentment, hatred, and even self-hatred.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dinesh. One of the most important points among many important points you make is that Martin Luther King appealed not for new rights, but for the enforcements of rights granted in 1776.
This is important because the progressives, as you know, Jamie, they like to think of themselves as sort of superior. That's the meaning of a progressive. That things used to be kind of messed up with Madison, Jefferson, and Hamilton, but then really brilliant people like Obama and Hillary came on, and they're taking us to new heights. Part of what I point out is that the greatest achievements, even of the reform movements like the civil rights movement, was not a repudiation of the founding, but a return to it. That the promissory note that Martin Luther King appealed to was none other, ironically, than the charter of a Southern slaveholder, Thomas Jefferson. And so that's a deep irony, but also, I think, a profoundly positive message of America, that the spirit of 1776 got it right, after all. No, the founders could not have outlawed slavery then, but they established principles that would outlaw slavery, as Lincoln put it, when the circumstances permitted.
Amen. Dinesh, why did you make this movie and write this book? How are you feeling today about how the book has been received, and what are your thoughts?
The book has been received with frenzy and apoplexy on the left. I'm delighted about that. I was just on National Public Radio with a guy from Mother Jones magazine who was so incensed that he barely could speak. He was just literally sputtering on the show. And I realized that that's actually wonderful, because these people live on a liberal plantation in which they consider any point of view other than their own to be somehow heresy. Well, this is a heresy that beats in the heart of every American breast. There's a natural patriotism in America that the left has derided, beaten down, besieged, and I want to liberate it. And my book and my film are ways of unleashing a very powerful force in America that can ultimately unify, and if it's strategic about it, crush the left.
Wow. Thank you for giving us those weapons, and also for your brave battle. Before we go, Dinesh, just in general, the last couple nights, last couple weeks, what's on your mind?
Well, I've been thrilled to be out there defending these ideas, defending America. I came to America at the age of 17, and I still remember the first feeling when I looked out of the airplane. I saw Manhattan, I saw the Statue of Liberty, And I had the same feeling that Scott Fitzgerald writes about at the end of The Great Gatsby. He talks about the Dutch sailors coming around the bend and seeing for the first time what he calls the green breast of the New World. The green representing fertility and promise and possibility. So I had that feeling when I was 17. It's never left me, Jamie. All my books, in some sense, have converged on this great topic of America. So for me, it's a particular honor and delight to present this argument now at this important moment of our history. And I just hope that it receives the widest possible audience.
Dinesh D'Souza, thank you so much. You are a hero. Thank you for fighting this battle. Thank you for standing up for freedom. Thank you for so effectively and bravely crushing, in many respects, the left and its arguments.
It's my pleasure.
Dinesh D'Souza, thank you very much. We hope you'll come back on the Glazov Gang.
Would love to.
Ladies and gentlemen, America, Imagine a World Without Her. Read the book, see the film. Special, fantastic, and superb.
I may say, Jamie, AmericaTheMovie.com. That's where to find out where the film is playing.
Absolutely. AmericaTheMovie.com. Visit the website, see the film, read the book. Dinesh, thank you very much. And we'll see you next week on the Glazov Gang.